Hi. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Flexibility in the Future, Why 2023 Needs to Be a Win for Working Parents. I'm Elizabeth Shackelford, and I'm so excited to be here today with Dr. Pam Cohen, Chief Research and Analytics Officer at WorkLabs, and Adrian Young, Director of Customer Impact at WorkLabs. WorkLabs is the research arm of the MOM Project, providing insights and solutions to power companies to build and drive people-centric workplaces. Based on WorkLabs research from 2017 to 2022, WorkLabs predictive analytics highlights the early signs of women and caregivers pushing the conventional boundaries when it comes to full-time work norms. Today, we're diving into WorkLabs pre-COVID predictions and the impact of the pandemic on the workforce, as well as looking ahead into what needs to happen for flexibility in 2023. Pam and Adrian, I am so excited to get started.
We're delighted to be here. We can't wait.
Well, Pam, before we dive into the research, I know I gave a very brief overview, but can you talk more about WorkLabs and the important work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Elizabeth. WorkLabs really started with the MOM project. Allison had the great vision to have a research unit along with the MOM project to start to study what women want in the workplace, what moms and caregivers need in the workplace in order to stay, looking at DEI efforts and how do you link those things back to retention. And first and foremost, how you look at kind of weak signals on the radar screen that would contribute to employee well-being and link back to bottom line performance for corporations. So we started this about 6 years ago and found that we were quickly becoming this huge repository of data on all of those topics and more. What we try to do is look 3-6 months ahead and see what's going to be happening, what we identify as those weak signals, and then study them in a rigorous fashion. Because a lot of times, while employers will understand inherently that you need to care about things like retaining women in the workplace or diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, but they're not sure how to do them. They're also not sure how they link back to bottom line performance. And when we can show things like that, then they really understand why it's worth the investment. So that's what we're focused on.
Well, and WorkLabs has been making the case for remote and flexible work since 2017. Tell us about that data and the research behind it.
Sure, it's really interesting. So, as I said, we were looking at what matters to women in the workplace, what matters most. We studied thousands of women and their preferences for certain work situations, and then again, link that back to bottom line performance outcomes such as loyalty and retention. And what we found regarding flexibility was even back in 2017, flexibility at work was about as important as salary. Now, I'm always a little hesitant to say that because that doesn't mean that organizations should give flexibility and not good salary. They need to both be there. However, they were stating their preference, their strong preference for flexibility. And remote at that time, as you know, was really not typical. But having some flexibility in hours, days of the week, times that people work, all that was still desirable. Women still tend to be the primary caretakers at home, and we're finding it very difficult to juggle work and home life and stay engaged with it all. But one of the things that we found as we were looking at flexibility is that flexibility really needed to be coupled with respect for flexibility. Otherwise, it ends up not being helpful at all in the long run. So if organizations gave lip service to flexibility, the idea that, yes, we should have flexible work schedules, and you can have this, but then you were being sidelined for any good opportunities, or you weren't getting promoted, or you weren't having time to make up the work. During a flexible schedule, you were missing meetings and things like that, and managers were largely panning you. That really wasn't at all helpful. It simply gave time, but you were losing ground in the workplace. Women left, and as the pandemic hit, flexibility really started to shift. Companies were forced to give remote work from home schedules where possible. And then they realized that flexibility could work. It's no longer as much of a debate. The question now is more about how you make that work. And that's a really big gain. And women who experienced working from home for the first time still had a lot of issues in terms of kids being home from school and all that extra responsibility as well. But one of the things that they realized and that they told us that they were able to experience part of family life, of their children's lives as they grew, that they never would have seen if they hadn't had a work from home, a flexible schedule. And frankly, as we move through it, they're not willing to go back to a more rigid way of working. So we're continuing to study how flexibility and various approaches to its implementation and upkeep can benefit both organizations and particularly the women and other caregivers who work for them. And we can talk more about that.
And Adrienne, can you talk more about how we're seeing this materialize today?
Yeah, I think Pam's touching on something that we talk about often in the context of the Mom Project, especially as that's the experience that many at the Mom Project employees have and what drew them to the organization, and same thing with the partners that join us as well. But it's kind of this shift from preference to during COVID a necessity for caregivers. And then as Pam mentioned, now it's more an unwillingness to revert back to giving up what they've gained in light of that shift. So it's become this leading decision-making factor for women in their careers. And as a real-time example, just from a pragmatic standpoint, the recent unprecedented skyrocketing flu cases and pediatric respiratory issues, and that's continuing with COVID, means that when schools are closing or kids are at home, flexibility for caregivers is not just important, but it's vital, right? When we have kids in households that are sick and we have caregivers that need a way to serve those family needs, companies have to be able to cater to that flexibility in a way that allows them to still work and contribute. And a lot of the identified drivers from that workplace flexibility that our research uncovered become really easily understood in that caregiver context. So the desire for maybe working hours that can occur at different times. So when there's pockets of opportunity when kids are asleep or in the evenings, and then also where work can occur, as Pam just mentioned, in that being able to happen at home allows you to still provide caregiving as needed. And that leadership really acknowledges employees' responsibilities outside of work, just considering how influential it is to not have to pretend everything's fine, right? And to be able to have transparency in the fact that you are caregiving. And then another thing is that there's genuine care for employees' well-being, that's showing up in a way, especially when whole households are sick, that you feel like your employer is invested in you outside of just your work role, feels really important and influential. And then most significantly, that there's, as Pam mentioned, this organization-wide support and respect for the idea of that flexibility, that's present and influential makes perfect sense when we think about that in the context, again, of caregiving.
And Pam, given that women tend to need more flexibility, why is it important to reconcile this need so that women don't leave the work environment? And then, why is it beneficial for companies long-term to adhere to flexible workplaces? And then the other thing is what is the impact it has on future female leadership and future workplace outcomes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's the kind of thing that we always want companies to look at, because in truth, women are invaluable and bring something very different, very critical to the table. In our research, we found that moms are consistently stated to make better and more empathetic managers and colleagues as well. In a large study that we did, 23% of female employees with mom colleagues reported having a more positive overall workplace experience than those without mom colleagues. And 81% of women surveyed who have managers that are moms ranked their manager as approachable, that they could talk to them, that they were empathetic. Also, not to rattle off too many stats, but these are pretty astounding. There's anecdotal information that we can give, but when you can back it up with statistics, it really touches the heart of organizations. 80% of the people that we surveyed reported that DE&I efforts are a top priority at organizations where the CEO was a mom. And female employees with mom colleagues rated their anticipated productivity for the next year as 12% higher than those without mom colleagues. That's really serious. In workplaces where DEI is a stated goal, in a stated mandate, we really need to look at how beneficial that is to organizations. And women come with new and different ideas. Women come oftentimes with the ability, a great ability to multitask, and particularly moms. And we talk to women about this who have had maybe a gap in their work experience, their paid work experience when they're coming back. They bring so much talent to the workplace. They're willing to hit the ground running. They're used to figuring things out on the fly. They're able to solve conflict. They're able to juggle multiple schedules, multiple things at once. And all of these things are critical to organizations that want to be successful. So those are the things that we like to emphasize in terms of why organizations should care.
And we know that remote work has a positive impact on women and caregivers in the BIPOC community staying in the workforce. Adrienne, can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think dovetailing on what Pam just covered, it is so critical that we recognize the additive quality of this subgroup of employees inside the work culture, so that when we think about flexibility as a workplace equity element, that we understand again that it's an additive, contributive thing to the culture rather than just something that we should be cognizant of. It really is something that elevates the culture at large. So if equity is achieved by really leading with empathy, that requires us to do some perspective taking. And in the example we just referenced, or I referenced before about caregivers, if we have leadership or decision-making stakeholders that maybe aren't caregivers, to understand the experience of caregivers in this moment and now is how you can really scaffold that inclusive culture that allows them to be retained, that allows them to be recruited, that allows them to, again, be influential in the DEI goals that we've set. Some of our recent research related to this and related to remote and flexible work just really showed that, for example, Black and Latino professionals and women compared to men experience far less flexibility across a lot of the factors than their comparable peer groups or compared to men. So that's often because, as Pam alluded to, they're doing maybe a heavier lift, or maybe the lion's share of caregiving falls to them. But when we consider what's missing if they're absent, we can't retain them, then we can do the work again to create a supportive environment that's as inclusive as possible so that we can retain them. So in that way, flexibility is a significant component of DEI because it serves and supports the needs of this underrepresented group of talent that is also high contributors. So when we build the culture in a way that allows them to thrive, then everybody wins.
Well, in going into 2023, in a perfect world, how can we set employers up for success with their remote workforce?
Yeah, I think it's about advancing the conversation to where we are today. So to what we're talking about now, right? So sometimes it gets devolved into this kind of binary either or. Should we be remote or should we go back to pre-pandemic? But we've advanced past that. As Pam alluded to also, flexibility is the norm. It's just a manner of determining how you structure it in a way that best serves, again, an inclusive culture that factors in the myriad employee experiences that you have inside your organization. So it's kind of become now just this vital component. And when we think about things like disability or, again, caregiving for rampant sickness, it's critical that we serve it today, we solve it today, and that we do that in partnership with our employees. So our research really illuminates the importance of that organization-wide, top-down respect for flexibility, and that's kind of a cornerstone around what makes it beneficial for the employee experience. And then, as Pam said, that next level effect on performance. So leadership's ability to respect from a genuine place of caring for people, it unsurprisingly influences a really positive employee experience, which then affects how the employer is perceived and, of course, affects performance as well. So it's almost like anytime it matters meaningfully to people, it will always show up in your business outcomes. And Pam's approach and the WorkLabs team approach is showing that with predictive analytics that were actually linked to those business outcomes.
And Pam, what is the right recipe for creating and experiencing a flexible work environment?
Well, I think that's shifted quite a bit, but we know some of the key ingredients are, one, again, gathered within that respect for flexibility is really coming up with ways to help people be successful. So that's offering training, first and foremost, training to managers on, for example, managers who may not have children, on what it's like when you have dependents at home. Offering training to managers and to employees as well on how to help others within the workplace catch up when they need a flexible schedule. That means not only videotaping, but meetings that people can't attend, but also allowing for people to have some sort of a buddy system or a mentoring system to get them more comfortable to manage workloads. It's coming up with creative ways to share documents and information. It's the expectation that across any given week, everybody's going to have to miss some meetings, but not all of them. So how do you make sure to effectively share that information? It's being creative in the ways that you help employees have that flexibility. It's also making the assumption that everybody needs some flexibility. It's not just parents and caregivers. It's also people who are just getting on with their lives. They have things that they want to do as well, because otherwise you create resentment in the workplace for people who don't have children or who may not be taking care of older relatives, for example, or just leading their lives. They need some flexibility as well. So it's coming up with systematic flexibility for those people as well. And again, leadership needs to be flexible as well. They need to show that they're taking time away, or that they will take some time for themselves as well, because leadership definitely needs to show by example that they care about their employees and that they understand that, part of life is integrating work and life together, and that they are willing to help show the way to lead that path.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point, Pam. Sorry to interject, Elizabeth, but we hear that in our conversations too, which is when respondents are sharing the experience, they take their cues, right, from their managers or from leadership. So what's modeled becomes the cultural norm. It kind of becomes the set rules of engagement for what we perceive as okay and acceptable, which is, again, why that top-down organization-wide is so important. That's the barometer that employees use as the cue for what's accepted, respected, and okay. So I do think that's just a really important point to consider for leaders moving forward and how they're going to decision make. It's really modeling what matters and what we mean when we say flexibility firsthand.
That makes total sense as like the top down, because you model your behavior, and knowing that your managers and the C-suite engages and adheres to flexibility makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Well, any final thoughts before we end our session today?
No, I think that you've covered this really well. Again, we're on a spectrum here with regard to flexibility and changes, but definitely I think on the right path. WorkLabs will continue to study that and other trends in the workplace. And so we really appreciate you doing that deep dive with us, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and for more information regarding training, workshops, and custom studies, you can get in touch with WorkLabs at insights@worklabs.com or visit worklabs.com. We'll make sure to pop both of those into the chat box. And be on the lookout for a handy year in review one-pager from the WorkLabs team. We'll send that via email to all the registrants today, and then we'll also post it on online tomorrow. Well, Pam and Adrian, thank you so much for joining today and sharing such valuable insights into flexibility. I know that I have a lot of takeaways, and I'm sure everyone else here had takeaways too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.